In this video, I'm continuing the process of building our book list. In this one, we're going to talk about Sass, or SCSS. So here is the website for Sass Lang. This is what we're doing. We're going to include this in our project and get it all set up, and I'm going to show you some of the basic features. The best place to start here would be to go to Learn Sass, because this is a good overview right here of some of the basic ideas. So let's get started. Here's our project. It is exactly the way it was last time. I pushed everything up to GitHub. Everything is up to date there, and so we just now need to include Sass. So the first thing we need is we need something to take the Sass and turn it into CSS. So npm install node Sass. Groovy. Now it's set up, or at least installed, not set up. Let's get it set up. And so let's start with this. Here's the idea behind Sass. Sass is what is called a CSS precompiler, which means you write your code in Sass or SCSS. Those are two variants of the same thing. I use the SCSS variant, and if I ever say Sass, what I mean is that particular variant. What you do is you write your code in SCSS, and then that gets turned by the precompiler into actual CSS, because you can do things in Sass and SCSS that you can't do in regular CSS. But you're limited by the browsers, because just because you use a feature in some other language doesn't mean the browser will actually support it. And so that's where the precompilers come in. Is you run the precompiler on your SCSS and it turns it into CSS, which is what the browser can use. So here is just a simple way to set it up, and a few of the features and some ways to organize your files and whatnot. So I'm going to start with creating a new folder, and I'm going to call it SCSS. This is the file this is the folder where I will put all of my SCSS files. And then I will use the precompiler to turn these files into quote-unquote normal CSS. Let's start with a file. I will call it style.scss. And so I can put regular CSS in here, and this is why I like this SCSS variant. I can put regular CSS here, and then I can run this and see what it does in terms of the output of the precompiler. Well, I'll start with this, and later on we'll actually look at SCSS features. So here we go, there's this. How do we set this up? Well, I'm going to go to package.json. This has already been modified because I did the npm install, and that added this line right here. What I want to do is I want to create another npm script. And right here is going to be the command for actually turning all of our SCSS into CSS. Let's go get that somewhere else. So here we are in the browser. Node Sass is the project we're using. This is at this URL. You can come to npmjs.com and just do a search for it, or just go straight here. This goes through some of how you could set it up, different ways you can use it. We're actually going to use the command-based, not the code-based version of this, meaning we're essentially going to be able to run this from the terminal. And so if you go to the very bottom and then scroll up a little bit, you will see the command line interface right here. And here's an example, node Sass. I cannot pronounce that. This is your input file, and then this is your output file. So let's take this right here and bring that in. So here we go, node Sass. My input file is not in this folder. It's in this folder, SCSS style.scss. There it is, over there on the left. My destination is going to be in my public folder. And the reason why is the public folder is where I have my static assets, and we're just creating a static CSS file. So let's see if this works. So I've created this task. I can run it by doing npm run SCSS. So we see some messaging. It says rendering complete, saving the .css file. So if we look back at our code, we can see, oh look, there's a new file, one called style.css. Notice the formatting is a little different. It's almost exactly the same. We've got our curly bracket in our original here on the new line, here in the output CSS. It's up here. Now, in terms of functionality, this is irrelevant. This is just how the preprocessor formats the output of the code. I did want to point it out because you can see that something is happening. Something is being transformed, and that's the way SCSS works. It transforms code from one form into another code, and this is code of another form, and this is the output form. Now, here is one of the nice things you automatically get just from using Sass. Let's say I forget that curly bracket and I hit save. If I go back here and I run this again, whoa, lots of errors. I made a mistake in my CSS and Sass noticed it. In regular CSS, when you make syntax errors, you normally don't notice it. Well, the only way that you notice it is that your style just isn't showing up on the page, and you're wondering, why is this not working? And eventually you realize that you have a syntax error. Sass will actually find our syntax errors for us. In this case, invalid CSS, after color red, expected a curly bracket, but there was nothing there. And that's exactly what I did. After color red, they expected a curly bracket, but there's nothing there. So this right here automatically gives Sass a step up. Now, you can get things that will check your CSS syntax outside of Sass, but you get it for free with this. And so this is kind of nice just in that sense. But let's do more. Let's see what else we can do with Sass. If we look here in the Sass basics, we can look around and see there's lots of different features. I actually want to look at import first. Import, this is possibly my favorite feature. I don't know. It's certainly one of my top 3 that I'm going to show you today. So here we go. I notice here in this page that you can look at the Sass syntax versus the SCSS syntax. Here's an example. And they've got a CSS reset file, and then they have another SCSS file that imports it. And it says import, and then there's the file name. Notice that this file that is imported starts with an underscore. That's normal. And so what we want to do is we want to leverage this. Now, my favorite CSS reset is the one by Eric Meyer. And there it is, right there. So I'm going to take it, license and all. I'm going to go into my SCSS folder and create a new file called reset.scss and put that in there. Now this particular reset resets a lot of things, and so this will drastically change the default styling for our website. Our website doesn't have much on it right now, but it will drastically change that. So let's go see that in action. First, because I haven't regenerated this and I'm still dealing with my old CSS file, let's import that, and let's start with just this page. There we go. The file is now imported. Let's view it. I need to run this, and so I'm going to leave this terminal tab free for my SCSS, and over here I'm going to run my start script here. So now we're running on port 5006. Okay, so we have our regular page. Nothing looks any different at all, except we are bringing in the style file. So now let's go back and take our reset and import it into here. So I'm going to import it before the paragraph. So import reset. And just for grins, so I can see at least that red color as well coming through, I'm going to put paragraph in. So I've got this reset. I've got this imported. Now if I run my Sass process, it should take those two, squash them together, and now if I refresh this, I will see that the reset has been applied. This took away lots of things, including the default margins on the body, the window, so everything is now flush up against the top and the left of the browser window. And also, I can see that red piece of styling from the paragraph. If we go take a look at what that looks like, and so we have our two separate files here, style.scss and the reset. In the output, they've been jammed together. Notice the reset comes first, then our red for our paragraph. And then we go back and look at the SCSS. That's exactly the order we did it here. We imported the reset, and so it came first, and then the paragraph comes next. So if we change this blue, rerun our Sass process, refresh, the blue will be there. Now, one of the gotchas when using any sort of pre-compiler type tech, and these are used very frequently in front-end development, is after you make your change, you have to make sure the CSS gets regenerated from the SCSS. And so I'm going to change it to green here. I'm not going to run the SCSS process, and if I refresh, I won't see it because the CSS file we're using still doesn't have the green. And so I have to come in here and run this again, and now it will be there. This is rather tedious. Fortunately, there's a really nice way of solving this. If we go to our package.json, if we go to the npm script for our SCSS, there it is, and I put a -- watch. What this will do is this will watch our files to see if any files change, and if any files change, it will automatically rerun the process. So let's see this in action. Now, if I run this in the terminal window, it'll run it, and it won't cede control of the terminal window to me. The process has the terminal window going. And so now, keep that in mind right there. Look at that. Now, I'm going to go change our SCSS, and we're going to go with yellow. It's going to be very difficult to read. But we're going to go with yellow. I've saved it. Noticed, hey, it changed. And the node Sass compiler noticed it. It said, hey, you changed this file. Therefore, it re-rendered everything and created a new version of style.css. And so now, I don't have to go rerun the Sass compiler every time I make a change. It'll just do it for me. And if I go back here and I make a syntax error mistake like I did before, once again, I get a nice error telling me I did something wrong. Okay, so go back and fix it, and I'm going to turn this to black. Now you can see the error is gone, it is re-rendered, and I can refresh, and that's good to go right there. Okay, so what have we done so far? We've integrated Node Sass, we've created our root SCSS file, we've talked about syntax errors, we've talked about file watching, we've talked about imports, so we can separate our SCSS into multiple files. Let's do that just a little bit more. I can show you where this can be super duper useful, and then we're going to look at a new Sass feature. So one thing that's common in web development is you're going to have different styles on different pages. So let's say I'm going to have a root page, I'm going to have a list page, and then I'm going to have an add a book page. So that gives me 3 separate pages. Let's just create some separate files. And so let's say I want some styles specific to my list page. And so I can create a list.scss file. Oh, let me rename that, and because I'm going to import this, let me rename that and put an underscore at the beginning. And so I can say something like dot list page and say this is going to be the class I'm going to put on my list page, and I can put any sort of styling in there under that class, and it'll affect only that page. And let's create another one for book form. And this time I'll remember to put an underscore before I finish creating the file. So here's our book form file, here's our list page file. You know, I think it's going to be less confusing later on if we rename this to go list page. There we go. Book form and list page. So let's import these. We'll get rid of this. I don't need it. So now that I've imported these here, what I can do is I can go create these files, put some classes on things, and have styles specific for those pages. So let's just go ahead and do that. So I already have the list page. Let's create a new one for book form. Is that what I called that? Yes, it is what I called that. So I'm going to call it again book form.mustache. On the body, I'm going to put a class of book form. This will allow me to take advantage of what we set up here. So book form, well, book form right here. And for list page, well, I need to go find my list mustache file and say class equals list page. So now I can have styling particular for list page and book form. So let's start by doing something silly. Let's say we want the header on the book form page, which we haven't done much with yet, but let's say we want the header here to be color blue. And then on the list page, we want the H1 there to be color green. Now if we did an H1 style, that would apply to everything. So this is going to be something we're going to say apply only on these pages. And so that will work here because I have a list page and then there's an H1 in here. And if we look at book form, here's the mustache file. We have a book form and no H1, so let's add it. Book form. So I think all of this will work as is in terms of the styling and the templates. What I haven't done is I don't have a route for book form yet. So let's go ahead and create one. I have list. And now I have book form. So I have my style. I've imported these styles. I think my SCSS file will have everything, or my CSS, and it does. It's got the reset, and then it's got these 2 styles. So let's try it out on the website. So here we go. We are on the root. Let's go to the list. So here's the book list page. Did I include the CSS file in the list page? I'm going to go for no. No, I did not. And I bet I didn't put that on the book form page either. Let's try this again, because that was anticlimactic. Boom, the reset is applied, and notice that is green, but it's terribly hard to see. So let's go back to our style.scss file. So that's our style, that's our CSS file. Here's our reset. Here it is. So the order of things in this file will determine the order of things in the output file. So what I want to do is I want to create some generic styles for my H1 and even for the whole site. And so I've got my reset. That resets everything. So I want my generic styles after that, right here. So here's a generic body style. Let's say for our H1s by default, they are going to be font size 2ems. And I want this before the list page and book form, those separate imports. And the reason why is these are my generic styles that will apply everywhere. And then in these pages, we can selectively override or add to them if we want to. But in terms of overriding, it especially makes sense for these things to go last, because that allows us to just use that aspect of CSS where by default, given the same selector specificity, a rule later beats a rule that happened earlier. And so this allows us to easily override things if we want to. So that's why we have this order. Reset, generic styles, and then we have our imports for our specific pages. So now let's go take a look at this again. If we look at the Sass, it's still compiling. That's all good. So here we go. That is a little bit more clearly green because it's larger. We can see that now. And let's try book form. So this one's blue, that one's green, and if we go look here, well, that H1 is black. And the reason why is because the colored rules were only in the imports. And so that doesn't apply to everything. It only applies to pages that have a book form class or a list page class. So that's how you can have, if you have separate styles on a page basis, you can just separate them out in separate files just for organization's sake. You could put all of this in the same CSS file. It would work fine for a while. Eventually that would get large, and this is a way of separating that out and making that a bit easier. So all that is, I think, good. Let's try another feature. Let's talk about nesting. Let's go to the Sass Basics website, go look here in the side here and go to nesting. What nesting allows you to do is make it a little bit easier to create selectors that leverage multiple parent-child or single parent-child relationship. Take a look at the, let's see, list page. Okay, so here we go. In normal CSS, if we wanted to target, let's say, paragraphs and headers, specifically for list page, this is what we would do, because we would need to say only affect the paragraphs within list page and only affect the H1s within list page. Let's go back to that list, and we don't have a paragraph, so let's add it so we can see this style, see this in action. Currently, no books listed. It's beautiful. So we have our header, which is green, and our paragraph, which is red. But that won't affect this, because, once again, this is not list page, so therefore this paragraph nor this header are affected. So that's how you would do it in normal CSS. If you want to do it in Nest CSS, you can use nesting. And I will commonly do this, where if I do want to put a style on an entire page, instead of having to repeat that each time, I'll do something like this. So instead of these separate rules and having to repeat list page, I can just create list page on the outside and then nest everything inside of it. Now this is a preprocessor, which means this is turning our fancy SCSS into regular CSS, because the browser won't understand this. It will look at this and be confused and be mad, and you won't see anything useful. But we are using Sass and the compiler, so it has now turned that into this. See here, what we were doing before, where we had to be redundant, we got rid of the redundancy on our side. That redundancy has to be there for CSS, but Sass is doing that for us. So when you nest, you can see what we were looking at, which is this, will get turned back into the normal CSS that you would expect. And so that's the basics of nesting. Now there's another thing that can be very useful, and this is my third of my top three. As sites get large, there are certain things that you tend to repeat a lot in CSS. It'd be really nice, coming from a developer's perspective, if there were variables in CSS. At the moment that doesn't work, but there are variables in SCSS. So if we go look back to the Sass site and come up here, we can see variables. It's the first feature they mention. And so you can create a variable by starting with $, and then give a name, colon, and then the values. And so I like this. This is a pretty good font stack right there. Let's take that and go back to our SCSS file. Let's see, I have too many things open. I don't need that. I don't need the reset anymore. I don't ever need to change that. It's done. It's in its own file, and I can now just forget about it. Here's my style.scss. I can go here and I can take this and say, I'm going to reuse this right here. And, you know, I do like to put Verdana in here. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. And primary color, this as a variable can now be used down here. So I can say color. And there we go. So let's check our terminal. It's been a while since we've looked at it. Everything's still compiling. Let's go back to our site. This still looks the way it did. Let's look back here. This is our index page. Are things even being applied here? Let's change this color to something like something a lot lighter. There we go. So now we can see that it's changed. In terms of our output CSS, let's go take a look. Everything, once again, looks normal. We've got our reset. Then when it comes to the default styles, we can see the variables are gone. They've taken what was in the variables and put them here. Here in body and here in the color for that H1. And then in terms of the list page, book form, all that is still there from our nesting discussion. So those are 3 features of SCSS. Allows you to separate things into separate files. It allows you to nest. It allows you to create variables. It also gives you some other features. I encourage you to take a look. Decide if you want to use them. I don't use the other ones all that often. These right here are the bulk of the features that I love, and I use these all the time. I hardly ever do a project without Sass. I love it. It's great. All right, so that's how to add it to your project, how to create an NPM script for it, talk about the general theory there, talk about some of the features, talk about how it helps with syntax errors. We got all that covered. I think that's it for this video.